All right, folks, I want to give a bit of an overview of cozemble, where it's at really, really early stages. This is super, super alpha. So you can tell by the look of it. So I'm going to build an invoice. Let me just crack on. So an invoice has an invoice ID, and an invoice ID is required. I can save that. That's prompting me to rename the model as an invoice. Should have done that first, maybe. Now, what you can see is happening here is as I'm editing the model, there's a live preview of the SQL that's going to get applied to create the database schema for the invoice. And you can see the events that are being accumulated in terms of the definition of the model as I'm doing things. These events event source the model into existence and then migrate. Each event issues one or more SQL statements to migrate it. So you can see the history of the events here in terms of the recording what I've been clicking. And you can see the invoice model being built as I'm proceeding. And I can now apply that to a database. So let me first of all show you that this is the database and it's empty. It's got a cozemble schema for its own needs. It uses the public schema of Postgres to manage next migrations. So this is using the next migration library to do migrations like a normal developer would, I suppose. So if I apply this to the database, and I go back here and I refresh, I now have tables in the app public table, and it's an invoice, and it just has an ID. The other thing to show is that there is a post-GraphQL instance running alongside the model editor. It's given me a GraphQL API to create invoices. It's tracking the schema effectively as I'm migrating it. It's making a live GraphQL API. So we'll come back to this a little bit more. So an invoice needs to have a customer. So this nested model interface allows me to do a one or many relationship between invoice and something else. So I want to make a statement saying every invoice has one customer. If I could spell it. Every invoice has one customer. Apply. And now the customer, I can start defining that. So I'm going to give it a first name, last name, email, and phone number. So I just get the properties in place first. Edit. So first name is required. Save it. Last name is optional, let's say. Email is required. You can add regex validations here as well. I don't have that fully plumbed in yet, so let's ignore it. And the phone is required. Save. I can now apply that to the database and I'll get an incremental migration. So we'll now see that I've got customers and invoices in PostgreSQL. So the GraphQL API is live tracking these changes. And if I refresh here, I've now got a customer table. So I've got an invoice with a customer ID. I've got a customer first name, last name, email, and phone. And let me continue by saying that I just want to demonstrate that you can do this to any depth. So let's say that a customer has an address. Every customer has one address. Apply. And let's give it line 1, line 2, and postcode. Line 1, line 2, postcode. So this is line 1. And it's required. Save it. This is line 2, optional. Line 2, optional. Postcode, required. Save. Okay, so the list of events is getting longer. The model definition is getting longer. Schema migrations are getting longer. Let's apply that to the database. So PostgreSQL will just show is now speaking about addresses. Addresses, customers, and invoices. And if I refresh the database, I've got an address table. So customer now has an address ID, and the address has line 1, line 2, and postcode. And in addition to this, there's a component that allows you to do data entry against the schema you've created. So I want to create an invoice. add invoice. If I click save, you can see that the validations are being applied. So let's just fill this in with any old thing to get the validation applied. I can save that. I can edit that. So, right, that's kind of some of the structure of an invoice, but an invoice has to have line items. So let me go back to the model editor, and the invoice should have a nested model of a many cardinality this time, of a model of type line item. And you need to give it a help with the plural statement for what that model would be. So it would be line items. So the statement reads, every invoice has 0, 1 or more line items of type, that should be singular. Every invoice has 0, 1 or more line items of type line item. Apply, plenty more SQL, apply that to the database. Let's have a look at the database. So now I've got line items and, oh yeah, I didn't add anything to the invoice yet, did I? So let me do that. So let's give it quantity, item description, and price. Quantity, item description, price. One thing I want to say is that there's only string types in this at the minute. I'm trying to make cozemble be a small core where data types can be plugged in. So that could be number, date, or even fancier things like Stripe customers or Google generated documents or images. I'll get to that later. So this is quantity. Quantity is required. Save it. This is the item. The item is required. Save it. And let's just say there's a price. And the price is required. Save it. And then let's apply that to the database. And then let's refresh the database. Tap. Yeah, so a line item has a quantity, item, and price, and an invoice ID. Sweet. So if I now go back to edit this thing, cancel that. I think I need to refresh this. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, I don't have persistence in the data editor yet. So yeah, we've lost a record we made earlier. But if I do 1, 1, let's just save 1, 1, 1, 1, and then do add line item. It goes into a recursive data editor. So now I'm creating a new line item in the context of a new invoice. So I can do quantity 1, the item is an apple, and the price is $2.20. Save, and I just add a line item 2 pairs. And they're 180. Save, and now I can save that, edit that. Okay, so and PostGraphQL has now adapted to line items. PostGraphQL out of the box does a fairly clunky GraphQL API. So if I wanted to add a mutation for invoice to create an invoice, and just to show you that it does work against a database, if I drop out the mandatory invoice ID and try to run that, it's telling me the field invoice of required type string was not provided. So you can see that you've got this automatically generated API to update. Basically, it's a CRUD API for the data types. That's not good enough. So one of the items on the to-do list is to make this API a lot better. Right, so let's try to summarize where we are with this. The current state of play is that me, Mike, I've added a string data type to the model editor. So I've established the core. The core is taking place, taking shape. It's looking okay. The SDK is not horrendous. We've got a primitive model builder, primitive schema migrator, primitive data editor, primitive deploy of PostGraphQL, but it's a solid start. And Twitter's up and running, GitHub's up and running, so you can follow along there. In terms of where this is heading, the next most immediate thing is to prove the custom data type support by adding number and date and selection and other types, but also more interesting types like Stripe customer. So you can imagine that a cell type would be Stripe customer, and it has its own nested model of first name, last name, email, etc. And that can be pulled from the model items around it. So I think I'm just going to have to demonstrate that rather than try to describe it. And doing this involving notional other people of adding the number type and the Stripe customer type will refine the SDK and the developer experience about providing custom data types. Beyond that, then, we'll introduce the app editor, and apps in cozemble expose subsets of models. So you might want somebody in the organization to only see invoices and somebody else in the organization to only see orders because they're in different parts of the organization, for example. And maybe some people should only see subsets of orders, like maybe populating line items. Several visual metaphors to choose from. You can choose spreadsheets or forms or a canvas of connected objects or a graph, etc. And we'll strive to make these pluggable so you can add in different types of app metaphors. And these apps, which can be assembled with low code really quickly from all the custom cell types that hopefully a growing community of people will contribute, I reckon it'll solve a large number of basic app needs around data entry, document generation, process automation, and all the rest of it. But beyond that, I want to support different backend types. So the models contain enough information to automatically provision Supabase and Hasura and PostgreSQL, PostREST, and many others. And this would be an extremely fast way to stand up a development environment without having a ceiling imposed by choosing cozemble. So I think this is a super quick way, getting your schema in place, getting the migrations in place, getting data editors, getting simple app editors with a doorway open to create whatever you want. And I need to add, by the way, that there will be the ability for multiple environments in cozemble at some point, so you can have dev and test. Well, you can have, initially you'll be able to have a test and live, so you'll be able to safely edit your models, apply them, test them, and then promote them to live. So cozemble is the idea where code and low code meet. So you can do fast assembly of commodity features using low code in this whole area here, but you have an escape hatch to full code for the specifics that I can't anticipate or nobody can anticipate what you might want to do. So that's the genesis of the word cozemble. It's a mashup of the word code and assemble, because in my view, not all systems should be fully coded from scratch. There's just too much commodity. But at the same time, low code can't handle specifics because it typically puts a ceiling on you. It's very hard to escape out of the low code platform in a developer friendly way. So what we're striving for here is to deliver on an old software development maxim to make the simple things easy and the hard things possible. So yeah, hopefully join us on the journey. Take the code for a spin. One of the things I want to get is to get it deployed on the cloud in a way that you can try it with single click. That'll be coming soon. Watch this space.